I became a founding member of an International Astrology Library Association with Michael Erlewine. I wrote the book I wrote the Moon Phases, the first version of it, and I ended up going to a big conference in Monterey, a UAC conference in Monterey, in California. So this was a fairly significant year, a very functional year, being in groups. Then it came back in 2001. It was back to its own place, a starting place again. So in 2001, I had moved. So I had moved. I had a big center right downtown center Toronto, and had to move down to Queen Street East, which was, I found another nice place. It was a big place, 3,000 square feet. Style, and I set up the center there. So I was in this new center on Queen Street East. I made a video of meditation of the time I spent in India. And I had a couple of big conferences. I was doing a lot of drumming then. As the moon went into Cancer, I was getting more and more into drumming. And I had a couple of big conferences drumming the stars, or star drumming things at 2001. So then along 2008, I'm just going through, so you see, it's alive. Yours will be too. It's like 2008, and in 2008, it was January. So yeah, I had begun it was the beginning of my websites, and I had started a new moon meditation group. And in this period, I decided, well, I would, even though I had my PAI certificate for competence and had for the school and for myself, I decided it would be worth. The national group had their exam thing, so I went through their exams and got my certification through the CAA, just to be part of the group, really. And that was at that 2008, 2015. In 2015, it went. Yeah, 2015 was a big change because that was when I went to China, and I did about 52-hour webinars, 2-hour PDF PowerPoint presentations live with a translator in a few cities in China, and then I started 2-year webinar series in China. So a lot of things started in that year. That was an adjustment, but at the same time as it was starting, there were difficulties with the person who was organizing. So the students were already happy, but there was politics and things that built up. So there was good and bad at the same time coming through that. So I came back after a couple of years, finished that, and then I started these webinars where we are now, which we're just finishing now. But the next turning point is 2022. Okay, so that's just the phase, the moon to itself. It's not the phases, it's the lunar return and the aspects of the progressed moon to its natal position. It's personal in the moon. It's just, you see the things that affect your security and your feelings, and then you have to reflect on them, because now as it's going around, of course, it's going to go across your 4 angles. The ascendant, I see the descendant, it's going to go above the horizon for 14 years. It's going to be below the horizon for 14 years. So your needs are going to be involved functionally out in the world, once it's above the horizon, the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th houses, and it's going to be more subjective and internalized, but when it's below the horizon. Oh, okay. So, and then you're going to have the real turning points, and that's what I marked here. I've added the turning point, the dates for the turning points for when it hit the IC, for when it hits each angle as it goes around, and it starts to see how it affects your life. This moon's a very sensitive, impressive thing, but as you tune into it, it keeps opening up more understanding, more understanding. It's the key to beginning to understand your past, where you come from, how you're evolving, and if and when and how you might begin to approach your spiritual path. Or you'd see the discontent or insecurity from not having taken that path. So always that path is there. Always that inner voice is there. Not always are we listening or feeling with the need. We often feel our security needs are other than in our silence or in our own inner peace. It takes time, usually takes a deep experience, and then you start building up habits and habits daily habits, a daily routine. You start eating better daily, you start meditating, so doing things regularly. And by the time you do things regularly over a month or two, it changes your whole behavior, it changes your whole life, and it changes the way your moon is working, and the way your memory is working, and your sense of health and security in the moment. So for me, my moon's in 11th. It went in through the 12th, 2.5 years. It hit my ascendant in 1950. Well, by 1950, my parents, like in this whole period, my parents, they were struggling to be together anyways, but they got together. My second brother, my mom got pregnant with my brother, and she had the baby. And just after she had the baby, within 4 months, her mother died. Her father couldn't live without the mother. He died. Her brother couldn't live without his mother, drank himself to death, all within 4 months or 6 months. And she had lost all her support system as the moon's going through my 12th house. And in a certain way, my mom didn't want to be pregnant to begin with. So she's stuck in her situation, things that my brother was born. So like there was an isolation, 1950. I think for a period of time in here, I was probably even in a foster home. That's my parents split up, and then shortly thereafter, they got back together again. So this is the dramatic kind of things happen around. I'm just a kid. But anyways, those things were happening. They were sort of deep things. I understood more of them as I got older. I found out more about the history of things, and I didn't know about those from growing up. The kid doesn't remember those. So I remember the moves. I remember the foster home for a short time. But it was a very unpleasant and violent place. But then the moon goes down through my first house of trying to feel secure in myself. Then I had started the school and things. It was all about my personal, the feelings were how I'm feeling personally, not about how I'm fitting in. It's just that we got into school, that we're going out, we're doing things. What are we doing? By 56, it hit the IC. And in 56, let me just see. Yeah, my mom got pregnant, and my brother my second brother was born, and the first of 3 boys, and he was very sickly, and it forced us to have to move from this poor place. It was a poor, rundown house, but it was on the edge of a river. For me, it was the greatest place ever. We had the river to play in. We had fields around us. We go fishing. We go swimming. Like it was just the perfect place to grow up. And as the moon hit the IC, but I was born, he was getting sick because the place was too cold, and we had to move from there to an apartment, and I had to leave the shore and the nature and the Tom Sawyer paradise of my youth to go to another part of the city. And so it happens, it goes by, but that was that time point. So, I'm like 10 years old. You just react going on with whatever you're doing. So anyways, that's that. It goes through the 5th, 4th, 5th, 6th house. It's not till 1964 it hit the descendant. Well, in 64, by then, I had in 64 my parents split up. So they split up and got back together, and then at the ascendant, and my son was born. My brother was born. My youngest brother was born. And at the IC, and then they split up, and they got their permanent. He got the separation agreement rated at that time. And I remember the day he came home with flowers. First one was Valentine's Day, and she had the summons to serve him. So he came home with flowers and chocolates. He got the papers, and he had to leave at that moment. He had to get his stuff and move out at that moment. And that was a big turmoil, anyways. And it was at those times it was the beginning of disassociations in school and disassociations around relationships and things. I would have said it had a big effect. It did have a big effect on my behavior and my patterns and my feeling secure, feeling belonging and stuff at that point. So then it builds up to 1970. Yeah, 1970. I just got talking. There's no way to go through this, and it's intimate, it's personal. To talk about how the moon's going around, you have to allow that to be there. So 1970, I had just come back from India, and really, I came back, I paid off the debt, and then I traveled down to California and Mexico, came back, and when I came back in September. So I came back from traveling, and I came back, I had found astrology, got married, I started working with astrology. This was a really a turning point to trying to have my own world for the first time on my terms, and trying to be established or maintain the rent, maintain a marriage like that. Didn't work for very long, but anyways, that was that point. My 77, went 76, 77, went through my 12th house, and then in 77, in this period of the 12th house, funny thing, when things difficult socially happen, I pull into myself and then I work on something. I get involved in a hobby. I bury myself in a hobby. So I was really buried myself in writing. I wrote my book on the I Ching, The Sequence of Change, during this period. And it was published. I did a, let's see, my first divorce was finally finished as Pluto hit the ascendant, and I had a big move I moved from one place to a big place with a team, with a group of people, and the group didn't work. It didn't last, but it was a move. It changed the rent. I had a renting a place. I had a place for just 6 or 7 years, and it changed all of that again. But I was trying to move for a group, to make a group. I have a team. We all lived together, and that, oh, it was a nightmare. When it actually came, it couldn't be managed very well, and it fell apart, and I couldn't. Anyways, that was the end of a bunch of friends, and I had to start over again, and that was again a more subjective point. So my mom, the parents split up, and she'd lost her parents just on the first moon over my ascendant when I was a baby, and then my marriage was my final divorce. My first marriage finally came through, and it's interesting because really the marriage started in '72. And she had left, and I couldn't find her or my son for 5 years. So at that point, as it finally ended, I found her again. I was able to establish a relationship with my son on weekends and stuff like that. But it was still beginning of a new relationship with son. By '84, I hit the IC. I made a second marriage, and I bought, the only house I ever bought was just at that moon on the IC. I bought a cottage just outside of just north of Toronto on the lake, and I was living there, but coming into the city, I had the two places, and I was managing that, and that was marriage number 2, and it went on for a couple of years, but that was the big turning point. I still was running the library, and I remember that was the time when Francois Gauguin came down and visited the library. Let's see. What they can learn, just give it a little bit more. It's the descendant 92. But each of these things were pivotal turning points in my, like other planet transits, other things. They're all different stories of how these things go on, but I can really see this adjusted in my sense of security, how it's affected and how it affected me for long periods of times, and my memories affect my memories. So I have to live with those memories and find new ways of living as this was going along and progressing. At the same time, looking back, I was probably maturing my ways a little bit. Although I don't think you can ask my ex-wives if I matured my ways. That might not be, I may not get so much of an affirmation there, but I think I was. But at the same time was developing a certain detachment, or I don't have to fit into below, like the marriage was the team, but it ended up being a little smothering, or either I was smothering and making too demands, or either way, it didn't work. I was really still driven by astrology and by my mystical sides, and that wasn't a good investment for just marriage. So by 1992, let me just see.